So talk about the trip itself, Congressman. Talk about, I think you've been doing this for a while, and you took 8 freshman Congress people down there.
Yeah, I try to take congressmen and women down there every 3 or 4 months, because the border situation, as much as it changes, it's always the same. But we had seen some dramatic improvement under the Trump administration, and I wanted people to see it right at the beginning of the Biden administration, where you have this stoppage of the fence, promise of stop deportation, the promise of catch and release again, and the promise of asylum and basically amnesty. So what we're going to see is an increased surge, but the other thing is to see where the fence is just suddenly stopped, where you have gaps that are not going to be filled in now. It's just very interesting for them. They need to see it. Most congressmen and women come from east of the Mississippi River. They don't realize how huge the states are out here, how vast the territory is, and you got to get down the border to see it.
What did you learn from your briefings with Customs, Border Protection, and Border Patrol? Talk about the trends that they shared with you guys.
What you're seeing is in some areas of the Arizona border, you have an increase in hard narcotic trafficking. That's happening pretty dramatically. We're seeing something good that's happening that started happening not too long ago under the Trump administration, was the southbound traffic is being inspected more. And that's huge, because that's how the cartels launder their money, and that's how they get guns into Mexico. So that's big. We also saw that in other areas along the border, you're seeing increased traffic with marijuana. So the reason, of course, is once you start regulating this, the black market still remains cheap, and so that's what's happening there. So we have places that are still wide open, and so the briefings were something that I didn't think I would hear too much, but they all agree. Everybody agrees now that the fence works.
The one thing I was telling you guys after we heard from the ranchers at Dan's place, as a guy who's been doing border tours just as long, or just as many as you're doing, and you hear Jim Chilton and these different ranchers, the story, I said, as I asked Jim Chilton, I said, how many years have you been telling elected officials this story about how you've been under siege? He's like, I don't know, 16? And the story really hasn't changed much, except for they do love that there's a better fence system on the southern border right now.
No, that's exactly right. And that fence system actually is great, because it actually funnels or channels people in. And one of the great things that they've done along parts of the border is where they had that 12 to 18 foot fence before. In many places, they've kept that and just built this new fence on the side. So now you have a double fencing system, which is what you have over in San Diego area, that has given them a 92% reduction in traffic right there with Tijuana. Now, people go around the fence. They try to still cut through the fence, but it is so much harder and so much easier to detect. And if the Biden administration doesn't steer the funding that we gave to the Border Patrol to get them staffed up, it's going to be really good. And that's why I take people down to the border, Chris, because this has been going on for a generation. And I, my Border Patrol guys tell me that nobody's been down to the border more often than I have. But I try to take people with me every time, because we can talk all we want. You and I know what the problem is. The people on the border know what the problem is, but you've got to get people who can make decisions to acknowledge what the problem is and try to make changes that way.
I was telling one of your congressional folks who was sitting near me, I said, you guys might be the chance to be the next group of people who actually do something about this one day, because in the end, the Trump administration, pushed this wall, got the funding in the early part of this, and, you got to hold the line on this, because I think for the first time in a long time, these ranchers feel mild hope about their border situation.
Yeah, while they're feeling hope, though, they're also really, really concerned about the policies of the incoming administration.
Sure.
I mean, I just was talking to some other ranchers that we went out to the next day, and they're really concerned. And we got a text last night as I got the D.C. saying that, yeah, they'd had another big group of illegals cross their property yesterday. So, I mean, it's a constant thing, and it takes a whole system. I mean, you cannot offer incentives for people to come in here illegally, and that's what this new administration is doing. Every time you talk to Amnesty, all of a sudden you see people form caravans. You see people massing on the other side of the border, and Biden says, "Well, not yet. Don't come just yet. Don't come just yet." But that they're not going to get that message. They're coming, and it's going to be a big group of people that are coming.
And they got their COVID shot record from Dr. Nick down in Honduras, so I'm sure it'll all be fine in the end.
Yeah.
What is so now that so tell us about business in Congress in 2021. Now that you guys have been in session a brief time, what's it look like right now? How are things operating? I know it's a little closer in Republicans to Democrats in the House, but what's the reality of trying to do the people's business, which doesn't usually happen lately in D.C. But what do you got for us? What's the story out there?
Well, I'll give you 2 or 3 points that I think that I've observed. First of all, the executive orders of Joe Biden's administration outnumber the actual piece of legislation that we have considered on the floor of the House, probably 10-1, something like that. So that's important. The second thing is, because you're right, the numbers are closer, and it looks like that New York congressional district is finally going to be certified for the Republican up there, so that closes the gap even more. Nancy Pelosi has instituted a bunch of rules to prevent the minority party, in this case the Republicans, from actually participating as much. I mean, everything from committees to without participation from the minority party. So those are 2 big key takeaways. And then the third thing I would tell you is that they want to do a lot more proxy voting, which is, in my opinion, unconstitutional, because you form a quorum by presence on the floor in the chamber itself. They want to have these committee hearings by WebEx and Zoom and that type of thing. And so it's anything but normal, and it's all being done. If I can get into the Capitol, it's being done from basically a fenced-in armed compound military installation.
So don't finish the wall on the southern border, build a wall around the Capitol. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's right. Walls don't work anywhere on the border, but they work everywhere else.
And my last question for you, what are the lessons do we learn now that in the midst of high numbers of positivities and whatever is going on in California, that the Emperor Gavin Newsom decides to open up his state? What's the lessons we learned from Emperor Newsom and his now he's going to reopen the state?
Well, the most important lesson is that the American people really are the base of government in this country. And when they stand up and they start, not violently, you got to be always careful, apparently, these days. You can't say fight on, because that's them's fighting words, apparently. But when they rise up and they tell their leader, guess what? We want you gone because you have not listened to us. You've violated our rights. You've enforced lockdowns. Then all of a sudden, the elected emperor decides, well, I can't be the dictator that I want to be. I've got to acknowledge that the people govern this country. And so, and I guess that's the number one takeaway, but the secondary one is just as big, and that is this has all largely been done for political purposes and not necessarily following the science.
You are correct. I was telling Arizonans that if you're going to head back to California to go do some beach work in the next few months, go first to Carlsbad, California. We want to support them with their dollars. As a town, they literally told Newsom to go to hell. And
That's right.
they said, you can come down and arrest all of us. That's okay. And we need more of that out there.
Absolutely right. You've got to have your elected officials responding, and if they don't respond, then they need to be held accountable. That's the real world. It's not the snowflake thing where nobody's held accountable. We should all be held accountable, and be open and transparent with what we're doing. And that's hard to do in an environment where social media gets in there and people just make up stuff and say things. But you have to fight it out, try to be transparent, and try to be responsive, and tell the people what you're going to do, and do it when you get there.
That's shocking. Andy, tell the people what you're going to do and do it when you get there. How's that for refreshing? So
that's the mantra, my friend. That's the reality of what it needs to be.